Cancer is caused by food.
And sugar is the number one culprit. Diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, the big killers
are by sugar and food. This video is brought to you by Policy Genius, and I'll share with you more about them in just a minute. There's a lot of sick people, especially in the U.S. Right?
Yes.
How many people are
it's
sick?
terrible.
And what do we categorize as sick?
That's a great question. So
what's obese? What's sick?
So at the top level, we have to understand that over the last 40 years, the tsunami has come that we weren't aware was coming, that we weren't prepared for, and still haven't grappled with. And that tsunami is chronic disease and food-related illness.
In 40 years?
In 40 years.
Did we have chronic disease prior to this?
We did, of course we did, but not to the magnitude. We used to have like 5% obesity rates in this country in the early 60s. It's 40% now in most states.
I thought it was like 30 like a few years ago.
Nope. It's like
40%.
Many states are 40% and many are just pushing 40. So it's 35 to 40, depending on where you look at it. Like California's probably less, Colorado's less, but Mississippi and Alabama are 40 plus. So we have 6 out of every 10 Americans who's got a chronic illness, 4 out of 10 who have more than one. By 10 years from now, we're gonna have 83 million with 3 or more chronic diseases: heart disease, diabetes, obesity, cancer, dementia, you name it. We are having 11 million people, and this is, I think, a conservative estimate, 11 million people around the world die every year from bad food, from ultra-processed food and not enough good food. Now, I think it's more like 50 million when you look at all the related conditions and so forth. It's a staggering number that beats out smoking. War, violence, accidents, you name it, nothing else comes close. Not malaria, TB, AIDS, all that is a fraction, a third of the deaths that are caused by chronic illness. And they're mostly preventable, and they're mostly caused by food, and they're mostly caused by the ultra-processed food that our food system produces en masse. It's the biggest industry on the planet. It's $15 trillion, about 17% of the world's global product, and it is controlled by a few dozen CEOs that are in monopolies around seed production, agrochemicals, fertilizer, processed food companies. It's staggering how the system has sort of just over the last 40 years completely transformed. And I remember like I was in some store or cafe and I saw this picture of Woodstock. And I'm looking at all the sea of people. And
in the 60s, right?
69. There wasn't one overweight person. I watched this movie, I think it was called Amazing Grace, about Aretha Franklin, African-American church. Now, African-Americans, 80% of African-American women are overweight. It is, they're
80% today?
80%.
Why is that?
Well, because they're targeted by the food industry, because they're in a vicious cycle of economic stress, of social stress, of unfair targeting and manipulation by the food industry. This is well documented by, for example, studies from Yale where they look at the amount of advertising and targeting to poor and African-American, Hispanic communities. It's staggering. And there was not one overweight person in this sea of African-Americans in 1970. And so it's literally just happened. And I was 11 years old in 1970. And in my lifetime, you see this change. So we have this staggering problem of chronic illness, which people suffer from, that's bankrupting people, that's bankrupting our country. I mean, think about the amount of economic stress. We talk about
insurance too. So much insurance money that's involved in this too. People are having to go to the doctor so much more probably now because of these issues, right?
Absolutely. And then many people are not adequately covered. So there's a lot of co-pays. I mean, people can have $10,000, $20,000 in co-pays. I had a patient the other day who, had diabetes, and I fixed his diabetes through food. And he says, I saved $10,000 a year on co-pays for my insulin and my
just the drugs.
Yeah, and when you look at the amount on diabetes spent in this country, which is basically 1 out of every 2 Americans has pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. 1/3 of Medicare spending is on diabetes.
1/3 of Medicare is on diabetes.
Yeah, Medicare, if it was a company, would be the biggest company in the world, $1 trillion budget a year.
Shut up.
Yes, 1/3 of our total federal tax revenue, expected to grow to 100% of our mandatory spending by 2048. And in 6 years, Louis, 6 years, the Medicare Trust Fund, which is sort of the bank account that we use to make sure we cover Medicare, it's a little complicated how it works, but the Medicare Trust Fund is going to be out of money. So that means that we're going to have to get $1 trillion a year out of our tax revenue, we're not covering it.
Oh
So
my
this
gosh.
is a threat to our economy. It's a threat to our political stability. It's a threat even to national security, Louis, because 7 out of 10 kids who apply for the military get rejected.
Can't get in?
Because they're too fat or unfit
No
to fight.
way.
Yes, there's 700 admirals and generals that published a report called Unhealthy and Unprepared about the threat in our military and national security. And not only that, soldiers are overweight. So we're feeding them crap. They go in Iraq and Afghanistan, the number one reason for medical evacuations was not war injury, was obesity-related problems.
Come on.
Yes, 100%.
Obesity-related problem? What does that mean? Like they're
Injury,
like a heart problem?
Injuries from being overweight.
Wow.
You know? And you can read about this. I didn't make this shit up. I mean, this is in that report, Unhealthy and Unprepared. Just Google it. You can read it yourself.
Wow.
It's staggering. So we have a $22 trillion debt. We have this threat of chronic disease exploding. It's getting worse and worse. Medicare for all is kind of a silly idea, and so is repealing Obamacare. They're neither going to help the problem unless we figure out how to stop people from going into the system in the first place.
Into the system, meaning getting unhealthy.
Yeah, if they don't need medical care, it's cheap, you know.
So let's go back to diabetes for a second. Tell me again the stat on diabetes. How many people have it or are pre-diabetic, and what? I'm uneducated on this. So how many different types of diabetes are there?
Okay,
and
good.
how is it caused?
Okay. So type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease. Pancreas fails. We used to be called juvenile diabetes. And you need insulin. You
need it.
You need insulin.
If you have type 1 diabetes, you need insulin.
You need insulin, yeah. Because your pancreas dies. Because your pancreas makes insulin and helps your blood sugar get balanced. That's the blood. It's sort of the gatekeeper that lets the glucose into your cells.
Okay.
So it's really important.
So how does that die?
How do people die from that?
I mean, how does the pancreas die?
Oh, well,
how does it get to that point?
It's an autoimmune, like you get multiple sclerosis or arthritis. It's basically your body attacks your pancreas.
Is that from eating a lot of bad foods?
Well, there's been links to dairy and actually as a driver of type 1 diabetes. Gluten, 29% of people who have type 1 diabetes have celiac that are undiagnosed. So celiac is a big cause of autoimmune diseases, including type 1 diabetes. So that's a very small number of people, very few. 1 out of 2 Americans have what we call type 2 diabetes. We used to call it adult onset, except now kids as young as 3 are getting type 2 diabetes from drinking soda from the crib. I mean,
my gosh.
I was working when I was a resident in an urgent care center, and this woman comes in for back pain, and she got her baby in a carriage, and I see her feeding this baby this brown liquid in a bottle who's 7 months old. And I'm like, what is
soda?
That? I'm like, what is that? She said, that's Coca-Cola.
No.
I said, why are you feeding your baby Coke? She said, well, he likes it.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my God, Louis, my wife showed me this video on social media the other day. It was of a baby, it looked like it was maybe 8 or 9 months old baby, having ice cream for the first time.
Oh.
Having sugar for the first time. And you watch the baby eat the ice cream.
I'll light out.
The eyes, and then the baby grabs the thing and stuffs with his face. I was like, oh my God, it was just so crazy. And it's highly addictive. So so now we're seeing 1 in 2 Americans suffer from either pre-diabetes
or type 2
diabetes. And that is when you eat too much sugar and starch. And every time you do that, it raises your insulin. Your body becomes resistant to the insulin, and so it doesn't work as well. So you need more insulin. And insulin does what? Insulin makes you hungry. It makes you store belly fat. It locks the fat in the fat cells, and it slows your metabolism. It's like a quadruple threat for your body to gain weight. So it's why we're seeing, and that goes back to what we're growing, right? So why are we eating all this food? It's because that's the food we produce, right? And so that's the other part of the problem. So we have the chronic disease, we have the economic impact, and then we're like, well, why do we have this food? So as a functional medicine doctor, I'm always asking why, right? Well, why are my patients sick?
Because it makes money, right?
Well, no, yeah, but I'm going even further. Why I got interested in this? Because why would a doctor care about agriculture and soil and all this crap? Because as I was thinking about my patients' diseases, most of them were caused by food and can be cured by food. So I'm thinking, well, if it's
how many are most of them? Is this like 50%, 70%? 80% of anyone that comes into the hospital or your patients who has some type of disease or some type of sickness.
I mean, unless it's like an environmental thing like mercury or Lyme or mold, most of the things.
Or cancer.
Cancer is caused by food.
Really?
70%.
70% of cancer is caused by food.
And sugar is the #1 culprit. Heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, the big killers
are by sugar and food.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you change your diet, you should be able to prevent
or cure sometimes.
Sometimes cure. Depends how far along things are, I guess.
Yeah.
But you can prevent heart disease, Alzheimer's.
100%. Yes, 100%. I mean, the studies are there.
It's crazy.
Even people who already have Alzheimer's, when they improve their diet, they can
get more functionality back.
This is a quick reminder that life can change at any second. And I've seen this happen so many times in my life, whether it's been a happy and exciting change or a change that tested my strength and perseverance. Now, either way, these changes have shown me that sometimes things happen that we just can't control. But what we can control is how we prepare and how we react to situations. And I'm well aware that something could happen to me at any moment, which is why it's so important for me to know that if some unfortunate event did occur right now, my loved ones would be covered. If there's someone who relies on you for financial support, whether it's a child, an aging parent, or even a business partner, you need life insurance. And luckily, Policy Genius, the sponsor of this video, makes it easy to compare quotes from over a dozen top insurers all in one place. And you could save $1,300 or more per year on life insurance by using Policy Genius to compare policies. And getting started is super easy. First, head right over to policygenius.com/Lewis Howes. In minutes, you can work out how much life insurance coverage you need and compare personalized quotes to find your best price. And once you're ready to apply, the Policy Genius team will handle the paperwork and scheduling all for free. The licensed experts at Policy Genius work for you, not the insurance companies, so you can trust them to help you navigate every step of the shopping and buying process. Head to policygenius.com/Lewis Howes to get started right now. Policy Genius. When it comes to insurance, it's nice to get it right.
So you've got me thinking, okay, well, if the patient's disease are caused by food, what's causing the food? It's the food system. And I'm like, well, what's causing the food system? It's our food policies. Like, what's causing our food policies? It's the food industry that's lobbying Congress.
It's got money.
It's the biggest lobby group in Congress is agriculture and food. By far, like by twice as much as the next lobby group.
By like gas and oil or whatever.
Yeah, exactly, right. And it's like, what? So then I began thinking, well, if I'm going to help my patients, I can't do it in my office. Like I can. It's like I'm like in the boat, bailing the boat with a hole instead of plugging the hole.
Right. You're not going to the source.
Right. So then I'm thinking, okay, well, what do I need to do as a functional medicine doctor? I need to go to the root cause, right? The root cause and why. And then it became clear to me that it's our agricultural system that's driving so much of the problem. And what we grow has been based on good intentions that were in the 50s and people were hungry. There wasn't enough food. There was a lot of poverty. And so we figured out a system to produce an abundance of starchy calories.
So we can have food.
So we can have food. And we were great at it. And we have cheap, abundant corn and wheat and soy, which are the commodity crops that are turned into industrial processed food, which is now 60% of our diet. And for every 10% of that you eat, your risk of death goes up by 14%.
Shut up.
Yeah, so you're
crazy.
So you're basically, feeding Americans a diet we know is going to kill them. The research is so clear on this. There's no scientific debate, and yet we don't do anything about it because we have these dysfunctional food policies. And then the way we grow the food causes climate change. And we'll get into that, but the number one cause of climate change is our food system.
Really? I'm the first one to raise my hand when I say like I love sugar, and it's my
Everybody
biggest
does.
vice, right?
Everybody
like I love cookies and candies and cakes and brownies and anything you can think of, I love it, right?
We programmed.
I don't know why I don't have diabetes. So much sugar I've had my whole life, but
You can't be having that much because you look pretty good.
well, I train hard too, right? I go through waves, but as a kid I would drink like 9, 10 Dr. Peppers a day. I remember.
What?
Like some days in the summer, you're just sitting around.
Been president. It's not what our president.
Exactly. But I would run around and work out and play sports, but then I would just drink because I thought that's what was on TV.
You were 16, 18. You're like.
No, I was like 9, 10, right? So I was like, but you'd see it on commercials like your NBA superstar drinking Dr. Pepper or Sprite or whatever on the basketball court. And I don't know if it was just like subconscious or just it tasted good and you didn't think about it.
This is where the food industry is so, I talk about it in my book, Food Fix, but the food industry is so strategic about how it advances its mission and goals. and it does it through multiple channels. And I'm just going to go through them because people just don't know.
The celebrity endorsements, right?
Yeah, the first, obviously, celebrity endorsements, which is the obvious one. They co-opt social groups. So they fund groups like the NAACP and Hispanic Federation. The African American and Latino communities are the most affected by diabetes and obesity, and they co-opt them by funding them. I want to show the movie Fed Up at the King Center in Atlanta, and Bernice King, Martin Luther King's daughter, was all about it, and she was excited. But once we got it scheduled, a few days later, I got a call that we couldn't show it. I'm like, why? She said, because Coca-Cola funds the King Center.
No.
Yeah. I went to Spelman College, which is African American Women College in Atlanta, and the dean said to me, half of the 18-year-olds coming into college have a chronic illness, obesity, hypertension, diabetes. 18-year-old women. And I'm like, why is there soda machines all over the campus? Why? She says, because Coke funds.
No.
And one of the people on the board of trustees is one of the highest executives at Coca-Cola.
Oh, man.
An African American woman. It's like, so they co-opt social groups. And that's why they, for example, oppose soda taxes, because they're in the funding of these big soda companies. And then, of course, they fund research. So they fund 12 times as much research, $12 billion worth of research a year to study nutrition.
What would be the first steps that someone could take to help?
Well, I think,
it seems like such a big...
It is. It's a little big. So let's talk about some of the solutions. So we know, food is causing chronic disease. It's destroying our economy. It's crippling our climate. It's destroying our environment and killing all the pollinators and all biodiversity. And it's causing social injustice because it targets poor minorities who suffer from problems. It prevents kids from learning in school because they're eating all this crap. It threatens our national security. It creates political instability. So we know all these things. But the good news is that by fixing the food system, we can solve these. And how do we do it? Well, it's going to need citizen action. It's going to need business innovation. And it's going to need policy change. And of course, other philanthropists and governments to help get on board. And I think that's what's really exciting to me, because there's so much hope. So for example, on a personal level, you can shift what you eat and what you do to drive change in the marketplace. Why are companies like Nestle and Unilever and Danone creating regenerative ag programs within their supply chain? Why are they trying to up the quality of their food and take out chemicals? Because consumers are demanding it.
Well, they're buying companies like Primal Kitchen that have like healthy...
Kraft, bought Primal Kitchen, which is basically a Whole Foods, really high quality, nutritious product with no junk in it.
Exactly.
Right?
I'm curious. You said something about nut milk and about dairy.
Yeah.
Has dairy been declining?
Yeah, dairy
in the last 5 years.
Yes, dairy consumption has been declining dramatically.
Do you know the percentages or
it's I think over the last few years, it's gone down about 25%. Borden, which is a big milk producer, has been around since 87, has gone bankrupt.
What?
Yeah. A lot of these milk producers. Now people are still eating cheese, they're eating yogurt, they're eating things, but actual milk consumption has gone down, and the nut milks have gone up.
Why is that? Is that because of education? Is that because of disease?
I think probably a lot of reasons. 75% of the population is lactose intolerant.
Yeah.
So I don't feel good.
I used to drink so much milk every day.
And how did you feel? Fine?
I always had like a stuffy nose.
Right.
Like I was always tired in workouts and practices. I was always blowing my nose.
Well, it's actually, milk is nature's perfect food, but only if you're a cat.
Right.
I mean, we're the only species that consumes milk after weaning. There are very few populations that seem to thrive on milk, the Maasai and some of the Northern Europeans. The other problem with the dairy we're eating today is not the dairy we ate, right? So there are heirloom cows. I mean, you travel around the world, I travel, and you go see these really weird looking cows in other countries. I'm like, what is that? And it's a cow.
Right.
But these are complex breeds that have different types of protein in the milk, different types of casein. And the Holstein, the homogenized cow, I don't mean homogenized milk, but they're all the same.
Not this.
And they're fertilized by three bulls, I think. They get the sperm from 3 bulls. And it's they're all the same. And they have bred out the beneficial or the safe casein, which is A2 casein, and they have A1 casein, which causes more inflammation, more congestion, more irritable bowel, more autoimmunity, more skin issues. So people are getting that milk isn't always the best. And I think then, people are eating nut milks. Now, they're not completely...
Are those good for you, though? Because a lot of people have still, skin problems.
Well, nut milks are problematic. So one, almond milk is great, but almonds are.
But you can't have too much of it.
Yeah.
I started to get like a rash after like I switched from milk years ago, and I started to get like eczema, like a little eczema here and there. And then when I stopped drinking it, it would go away, and I was like, maybe I'm drinking so much almond butter, almond milk,
a lot
everything.
of them had carrageenan in it, which causes leaky gut. You get leaky gut, you get eczema. So it's a thickener they put into these milks. They put a lot of sugar in these milks. They put a lot of gums in these milks. So you have to be very careful about which one you're having. And
just because it's healthier doesn't mean it's healthier.
Yeah, and I don't really like, again, drinking tons of soy milk. It could be GMO soy. It could be full of glyphosate. If not, it could be, getting huge amounts of these phytoestrogens, which our bodies aren't really meant to get. Eating traditional foods in traditional amounts are fine. Tofu, miso, tempeh, those are fine.
Really?
Those are how people have consumed soy over millennia, but not 10 pounds a day and not 3 glasses.
Gallons of.
No, I had a stepdaughter once. She loved soy milk, just drinking it all day. And she started at 9 years old getting little breasts. And I'm like, well, that's not good.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, we have to be smart about it. And I think, if you're using a little here and there, but I don't recommend people drink it as a drink.
Really?
If you want to put a little coffee.
Almond milk or soy milk.
There's
or
macadamia milk, coconut milk.
Don't drink
oat
it.
Milk. No, I think have it sometimes.
You have a glass once a week, maybe it's okay, but not like drinking glasses every day.
Yeah, probably not. Good idea.
But you can add it to things.
Sure, put it in a smoothie. You mix them up. There's macadamia milk, there's cashew milk, there's hazelnut milk, there's all kinds of milks now. So I like macadamia.
Macadamia milk is so good. It's like sweet taste.
Yeah, you can make your own nut milks. I have cookbooks like Food What the Heck Should I Cook, and others teach you how to actually make your own nut milks at home. You soak the nuts, you put them in a blender with some water. There's no additives, ingredients, sugar. It's great.
But not too much of it is what you're saying.
Yeah,
That's the challenge.
Like anything.
Except for water. Drink a lot of water. That's
Listen, anything it can kill you, right? Water can kill you. Marathon runners who overhydrate, their body is diluted, their blood is diluted with too much water, and they get what we call low sodium or hyponatremia, and that causes seizures and death. So you can die from drinking too much water. So it's all about eating stuff in complex amounts and in a complex variety of foods.
So a variety of food is good.
Huge. We used to eat 800 species of plants.
And that's good. Not having the same three things every day.
Well, hey, listen, most of our diet is corn, soy, and corn, soy, and wheat. Most of our diet. And in other countries, rice in there. And those are, all mostly turned into processed food. How does food affect our brain? Well, I wrote a book about 13 years ago called The Ultra Mind Solution about how the body affects the mind. We often know about the mind-body effect, which is real, but there's also the other direction going on. And it turns out that food is probably the biggest driver of dysfunction in the brain when it comes to mood, behavior, attention, memory. And this is not just sort of hypothetical, but there's a whole department, for example, at Harvard of nutritional psychiatry. There's a whole department at Stanford of metabolic psychiatry. I've had both of them on my podcast, The Doctor's Pharmacy. The doctors from those institutions are talking about the role of food and the brain and the mood. And we see depression, anxiety, irritability, stress. It turns out that when you eat the American diet, or otherwise known as the SAD diet, the standard American diet, that people are damaging their brains in ways that create inflammation in the brain. And we now know that mental illness often is an inflamed brain. When you cut yourself and you get an infection, it's red and hot and sore and inflamed. If you sprain your ankle, it's sore. If you get a sore throat, it's sore and red. When your brain is inflamed, it doesn't hurt. The only way your brain knows how to say ouch is by getting depressed or anxious or angry or irritable or having even more serious consequences. And so the food that we're eating, predominantly the sugar and starch and processed ingredients, additives, the lack of good fats, the predominance of bad fats and refined oils, the nutrient depletion of our diet. 95% of us are deficient probably in omega-3 fats. 90+% of Americans are deficient in one or more nutrients at the minimum level to prevent deficiency, which all play a role in mood, like folate, magnesium is incredible for anxiety, iron, zinc, all these, vitamin D, all these play a role in the brain function. You hear about winter blues, that's because of lack of vitamin D. So we know about this intimate connection between food and mood and nutritional status and mood. And the clinical trials have been really staggering, showing that people who eat a whole foods diet and get rid of the junk actually can get rid of depression. I see panic attacks, anxiety disorders often caused by the food we're eating. Just an example, when you eat sugar or starch, your cortisol level goes up, which is the stress hormone. Your adrenaline goes up. So if you eat a bagel or a cookie, your body literally has the same reaction as if you're running from a saber-toothed tiger.
Wow.
and that can create anxiety
Internally with the insulin
internally.
spike. Yeah.
I mean, you could be totally fine and calm and take 5 deep breaths before your meal, but if you eat all that crap, your brain is going to feel it. Your body's going to feel it.
So what happens to the brain when you're eating a bagel or an ice cream cone or whatever it is, and it goes into your gut? Does it send signals to your brain, and then it starts to, what does that do? Is it inflame it in that moment? Does it take time to inflame something?
So there's a whole cascade of things that happens when you eat mostly the starch and sugar. That's 60% of our diet, right? It's ultra processed food. Mm-hmm. It's the main ingredients of corn and flour and sugar that are in everything. And what happens is you get this spike in blood sugar, which then creates a spike in insulin. At the same time, you get an immediate spike in cortisol and adrenaline. That's the first phase of response. Of course, it affects your liver and screws up your cholesterol and all that. But what happens next is even more concerning. It drives all the available fuel in your bloodstream from all the food you've eaten, sugar and starch and whatever bad fats, it drives it into your fat cells. And it's a one-way street into your fat cells called your adipocytes around your belly, those belly fat cells. Those fat cells, in turn, create a whole series of chemicals, hundreds of chemicals, hormones, inflammatory markers and messengers, neurotransmitters. It's quite striking when you look at, they're not just like holding up your pants, it's fat there. It's like, it's actually doing stuff. And when you eat in that way, it drives hunger, it stores fat, it shuts down your metabolism, and it literally slows your metabolism. And even worse, it locks the fat cells so that fat can't get out. It's like a one-way turnstile, only can get in. And then on top of that, it releases all these inflammatory messenger molecules. We call them adipocytokines that go to your brain and they create inflammation in the brain. So it's a kind of a downstream effect of our chronic eating this way. If you have one cookie or one bagel, it's not going to kill you, right? But if you're constantly eating this stuff, and we're talking about the average American eats a pound almost of flour and sugar a day.
Wow.
A pound. Like 152 pounds of sugar and 133 pounds of flour. You add that up and it's... And I know I'm not eating that much and you aren't. So a lot of people are making up for the difference.
Right. So food affects your mood for sure.
Yeah. And not even that. It's not even just, what it was striking. And I don't know if you had David Perlmutter on the show, but he wrote a book called Brainwash. And it really speaks to what happens to the brain when you don't eat real whole foods and you eat too much of this American diet that we're all eating. It disconnects the frontal lobe from the amygdala. Now, what does that mean in English? The frontal lobe is the grown-up. It's the adult in the room. It's like you think you're going to punch that guy, but you go, I better not punch that guy, right? It's that adult in the room that sort of is your higher self. And the amygdala is your reptile brain. It's your lizard brain that's going to just run or fight or flee. And what happens is literally physiologically, these parts of the brain are connected. But when you eat crap, they get disconnected. And so you're constantly reacting from your amygdala with no grown-up in the room, which is why we see this level of divisiveness and hatred. And I mean, just all the upheaval we're seeing in society now. I think a large part of that has to do with our brains being constantly triggered by this reptilian insult that is driving behavior change. And when we look at the fact of other data to support it, it's not just a theory. In prisons, if you give prisoners healthy food, swapping out all the crap they eat in prisons, which is pretty darn bad, there's a 56% reduction in violent crime in the prisons. If you add a multivitamin, it's an 80% reduction.
Come on.
If you look at kids, and this is in juvenile detention centers, we've done clinical trials because these people locked up. So it's a really great kind of study. Now, these kind of studies are hard to do because mostly we call them free living humans who don't really behave and they'll do whatever they want. They don't follow the study protocol. When you're locked up, you get what you get, right? And so they took these kids.
The environment's the same for everyone. Yeah, all that stuff.
That's right. And they took these kids and these were kids who were disruptive, violent, aggressive, oppositional, suicidal. There was by cleaning up their diet and giving them whole foods, there was a 91% reduction in all violent behavior. Oppositional behavior, need for restraints went down. Suicide went down 100%. I mean, it's the third leading cause of death in that age group. It went down 100%. No suicides. And so you see this incredible data that comes from understanding nutritional psychiatry. And you go, wait a minute, maybe some of our messed up society has to do with not only the problems with obesity and the problems with chronic disease and the fact that COVID is landed on a perfect, laboratory for spreading in America because we're all so unhealthy and our immune systems are so sick because of our diet. But it's also led to this incredible disruption of our brain and our mood and our behavior, which we're seeing it rampant in society today.
What would you say are the 3 foods we should all stay away from in order to increase the happiness of our mental health?
Oh, that's not hard. So, in my book, The Pegan Diet, it's called 21 Practical Principles for Reclaiming Your Health in a Nutritionally Confusing World. and it's really practical. And there's a bunch of steps at the end. But I think, the real dangers are, one, high fructose corn syrup. Because anything with high fructose corn syrup, almost by definition, is a highly processed food that comes with all kinds of other bad crap. So if you're reading labels, like if you just can eliminate that would be like number 1. Number 2 would be trans fats, hydrogenated fats, which...
What is that? What's that in? What foods is that in? Is that processed packaged foods?
What,
is that
hydrogenated fats?
Is that fried food? Is that French fries? Yeah.
So hydrogenated fats have literally been banned by the FDA, essentially ruled not safe to eat, but they're still out there. Okay, you can still find them. It's less, but and they used to be really. It makes Crisco shortening. So anything that comes with a baked good or any processed food. And the third thing would be, you should only eat foods with ingredients that you would have in your cupboard, can pronounce and recognize. In other words, would you have butylated hydroxytoluene in your cupboard that you sprinkle on your salad,
No.
Which is also known as BHT. It's a preservative that's been linked to cancer. It's banned in Europe. We have it in everything here. So if you wouldn't have, azodicarbonamide in your cupboard that you would use in your stir fries, you probably shouldn't eat it. And yet this is in so much of our foods. In fact, in America, it's legal. This is an ingredient used in breads to make them fluffier. Subway used it in their Subway sandwich.
Didn't they have to take it out? Didn't Vari get it taken out?
Yeah. So our friend shamed them into taking it out, but it's still legal here. It's not illegal. She just shamed them publicly by trying to eat her yoga mat in front of the Subway and got them. But in Singapore, for example, if you're a food manufacturer and you use this ingredient in your food, you get a 15-year jail sentence and a $450,000 fine.
No, you do not.
Yes, you do.
That's
I swear to
crazy.
God. In Europe, a lot of these chemicals are banned. So basically, just eat real food. So get rid of all those 3 things that would make you likely to end up in trouble. And then, there's another hierarchy of how do you even upgrade the quality. But the whole principle of the Pegan diet is that, 1, food is medicine. Food is medicine, and quality matters. And then it's not just calories. It's information, and it literally can upgrade or downgrade your biology with every bite. And so when you're putting something in your mouth, you're literally speaking to your genes. You're speaking to your hormones, your brain chemistry, your immune system, your microbiome, your mitochondria. Everything is controlled by what we're eating. So the book is really focused on 2 key principles. One is food is medicine, and the other is personalized nutrition and medicine. Because, I call it the Pegan diet as a joke between paleo and keto, right?
Sure.
And I was sitting on a panel with a friend of mine who was a vegan cardiologist, and another one was a paleo doc, and they were just fighting. And I was in the middle, and I felt like a ping pong ball going back and forth. And I was like trying to break the tension a little bit. And I said, hey, if you're a paleo and you're vegan, I must be Pegan. And it was kind of a joke, and everybody laughed. And I was like, whoa, wow, that was good. And then I thought about it on the way home, and basically they're identical except for where you get your protein, animals or grains and beans. They both agree that we should eat whole foods. They both agree we should eat lots of vegetables and nuts and seeds and good fats and get rid of processed foods and low sugar. And even agree that we should not be eating dairy, which is a whole controversial subject, but they're pretty identical.
Sure.
And so the goal of this book is not to create a dogma, but to create a Big Ten inclusive framework for people to think about food in a different way. So what are the principles of healthy eating that are adaptable to different cultures, different preferences, different belief systems? And I think, I always encourage people to listen to their body, not to dogma. A lot of our nutrition advice is based on, be keto or be paleo or be vegan or be this or be that, be raw. And the truth is, it depends on you. If I do keto, my body doesn't respond great. I mean, I do higher fat, but another person who's a diabetic, they might do great on it.
Right.
You know, one person on a vegan diet, like Rich Roll, may be able to run triathlons. I mean, just incredible Ironman stunts of heroic effort, but he may be a unicorn, or maybe he's figured out how to do it. And another patients of mine are extremely ill after years of being a vegan because of their nutrition depleted, or they don't have protein, or their body doesn't like it. I just had a patient, for example, this week who was a young woman, 26 years old, who's been a vegetarian vegan. She was basically a vegetable and sugar vegan. And she didn't even like to...
So she would eat sugar as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, a lot of people who are vegan eat sugar because the body starts to crave the carbohydrates and sugar. So it's not uncommon. And so she wasn't overweight at all, but metabolically, she was super unhealthy. She had, acne, and her gut was a mess, and she had very low protein, like very, very low amino acids. She had very low vitamin D, extremely low B12, very low iodine, very low zinc. I mean, she was extremely unwell, and her diet was just so not fit for her. Mm-hmm. So we had to sort of upregulate it and change it a little bit. I had to get her on some different protein shakes, which she needed. I had to upregulate her vitamins. I had to sort of get her off the sugar. I mean, but I think, it takes a lot of work. So the key is, how do you personalize the diet and get away from the basically religious nutrition that we
which is either all vegan, vegetarian, keto, or carnivore. Right. There's all these extreme diets, right?
Exactly, yeah. And again, I always encourage people to listen to the smartest doctor in the room, which is their own body.
Yourself.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, how do you feel? Do you feel great? Do you feel bad? How's your stomach? How's your head? How you're clear? Are you have energy? What is happening to you? So I think it's important to understand that we are all different, and that the future of medicine is personalized medicine. There's a whole section here on personalized nutrition and how do you identify your particular needs by various kinds of testing, whether it's genetic testing, whether it's metabolic testing, food sensitivity testing, and how do you actually figure out how to dial in your perfect diet.
Everyone's kind of swearing by their way is the way. But it seems so extreme in my mind, and I empathize with vegans, and I'm like, I don't want to hurt animals either. And but then I've tried it for a while, and I'm also like, gosh, but I miss meat. And it's like, what is the way? And what I'm hearing you say is that there is not one size fits all. You have to really figure out what works for you. Yeah.
The one size that fits all is quality, is understanding food as information. Just meat, for example. So feedlot meat is an abomination. It's horribly cruel to the animals. It grows the animals in ways that are extremely destructive to the environment by these monocrop corn and soy fields we use to grow feed, the feedlots that produce tremendous amounts of pollution, all the hormones and antibiotics that we use, and the quality of the meat is very different. And so it's basically bad for you, bad for the planet, and bad for the animals. So it should be banned, 100%.
What would you say are the three things you would keep doing for as long as you could to help you with anti-aging and living longer and staying? Would it be the peptides? Would it be something else?
I listen. I think it's like those are like, there's the 80 and that's the 20. So that's the 20 is all that fancy stuff, and the 80 is
food.
Your food and fit exercise. And I've been doing more strength training, and I've been doing more cardio, and I think, sleep and meditation. And then the other thing that people often don't think about for longevity is community, love. Because love is medicine, just like food is medicine.
Absolutely. And I think stress in your heart, you're going to die. It's going to make you sick.
It's really true. And what's really striking is when you look at the data, some of the most potent predictors of longevity is not your diet, actually. It's whether you are socially connected. Mm-hmm. So if you're part of a knitting club or a bridge club, or a bowling club, like the longevity numbers just go crazy. And there's a great study that was done years ago in a little town called Rosario, what was it? Rose something, Pennsylvania. And it was basically in a community of Italians from this one little village in Italy that all kind of moved over to this one town years and years ago. And they kind of left their old Italian diet behind and adopted the American diet. But this community was so tightly knit, and there are all different economic spectrums in the community, but they were always there for each other. They would eat birthdays and parties and holidays. There was a sense of connection and love in the community. It was really unique. And what was striking is even though they adopted all the American lifestyle habits, they didn't get the same mortality as the rest of Americans because they had this incredible social fabric that was providing them a foundation of love and connection and meaning and purpose. And what's striking is I just saw an article, even in one of the major medical journals, the Journal of the American Medical Association, that was striking to me because it was so clear that meaning and purpose are also predictive of longevity. So if you have no meaning and purpose in your life,
what's the point of being here? I might as well end it.
Right, you kind of have nothing to live for, right? So I think it's really quite interesting, and I think we're in this just moment where we're learning so much about medicine and well-being and health, and we are in a massive paradigm shift. That's what functional medicine is. That's what this book is about, The Peak Diet. It's really a functional medicine view on food and nutrition and health and longevity.
You talked about insulin resistance as one of the leading causes of chronic disease today. What is insulin resistance? How do we prevent it? And then how do we treat it?
Yes. Well, great question. And I think we hinted about it a little bit before, but 88% of Americans are in poor metabolic health, right? That's staggering. That's almost 9 out of 10 of us. And that is poor metabolic health means insulin resistance. And I'm going to unpack that in a minute. 75% are overweight, 42% are obese, 40% of kids are overweight. I mean, it's terrible. 1 in 2 Americans has prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. All this is caused by the amount of starch and sugar in our diet, right? Broccoli is a carbohydrate. That's fine to eat. But white flour is also a carbohydrate. It's worse than sugar in your body. So the volume of starch and sugar, this predominantly our calories, is driving this poor metabolic health. And what happens when you eat starch and sugar, which, by the way, we really didn't have, right? For most of our human history. We basically were hunters and gatherers till 10,000 years ago. And then, if we had grains, we had whole grains. The milling of flour didn't happen until about 150 years ago. And when that started and they started to actually refine the flour is when we saw these nutritional deficiencies like like beriberi and pellagra and these horrible vitamin deficiencies. It was really terrible. And they actually, they actually discovered vitamins because they started depleting the food. So when we eat in a way that has all this starch and sugar, it causes our blood sugar to go up. That causes our insulin to respond to try to keep the blood sugar down. So you can have normal blood sugar if you go to your doctor. You can have a normal A1C, which is your average blood sugar. But if your insulin's high, you're in big trouble. I saw a guy who was 400 pounds. His blood sugar was perfect. His average blood sugar was perfect. His insulin was like 20 times normal because it was keeping everything down.
Oh, man.
Now, insulin gets that high because the body becomes resistant to the effects of the insulin. It's like the boy who cried wolf. So you need more and more and more insulin to get the blood sugar down. More and more insulin. What does that do? Well, insulin has a number of roles. In a small amount, it's good. Keeps your blood sugar good. If you're healthy, fine. If you have no insulin, you get type 1 diabetes, you need insulin shots. But most people have what we call type 2 or prediabetes or insulin resistance. And it turns out that this is the driver of cancer, like the most common cancers: prostate, breast, colon cancer, pancreatic cancer. Heart disease, most heart attacks are caused by this. Diabetes, obviously. Dementia, they're calling type 3 diabetes. Depression. So many issues are driven by this insulin resistance that are burdening our society with chronic disease, which affects 6 out of 10 people. And so when you have this phenomenon in your body, it drives inflammation. It drives fat storage in your belly. It causes more hunger. It slows down your ability to lose weight. And it creates this vicious cycle of muscle loss and fat gain that it's like super fuel on the aging process. That's why you see diabetics, have, far more heart attacks. They're 4 times the risk of dementia. They're more likely to get cancer. It's just all related to this phenomena. And if you're talking about the game of longevity, I remember this lecture I heard like 20 plus years ago from a Harvard professor who was talking about, preventive cardiology. He said, Mark, if you could take a group of 100-year-old people who have perfectly clean arteries, they'd have one thing in common. I said, what's that? He says they're insulin sensitive, meaning they are able to easily regulate their blood sugar with very minimal amounts of insulin. But most of us, because they're basically healthy or they have genetics that help them or they eat, well. But the key is to the game of aging is to keep your insulin low, right? And if you keep your insulin low, you're going to be activating all these anti-aging mechanisms in your body. If your insulin's high, you're going to accelerate all the aging. So that's why starch and sugar are poison.
When insulin is high, it's weakening immune system, it's increasing inflammation, which is making you age faster, essentially, and get sick, right?
Yes, and not only that, Lewis, what is happening now with COVID in America? Why are we the worst country in the world with COVID? It's not just political mismanagement. The fact is that we were the sitting duck perfect place for COVID to land and cause havoc. Why?
Because we're obese.
Because we're obese, we're overweight, we have chronic diseases, and these are all diseases of inflammation. So we are pre-inflamed. Mm-hmm. And when COVID hits, it's like gas on the fire, right? It just blows up your immune system, which is why you see these cytokine storms and this overwhelming inflammation in the body. It's not the virus that kills people. It's people's own bodies' overactive inflammation because it's primed because of our inflammatory diet. And so nobody's talking about this. I think Bill Maher is the only one I've seen talking about it in the media, who says, hey, guys, the thing we can do, yes, maybe we need to be protecting ourselves and practicing social distancing, maybe getting vaccines. That's a whole rabbit hole we shouldn't go down. But nobody's talking about
getting healthy,
our diet,
yeah,
or losing weight, or immunorejuvenation, or even things like vitamin D, which are so cheap and simple. I mean, if I were president, I would literally give free dose of vitamin D to every man, woman, and child in America. Just boom. Give it to them.
There's a lot of research showing that vitamin D is defending the body against COVID, right?
Yeah, if your vitamin D is low, you're 80% more likely to end up in the hospital and die. If your vitamin D is high, you're 94% less likely to end up in the hospital or in the ICU. 94%. Right. That's better than vaccines, right? With a lot less hassle and risk and side effects.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so how do we treat it then? What are the things that we need to do when our insulin is high?
Well, guess what? I wrote a book. It's a really good book. It's called The Pegan Diet, yes. And it helps you do that. And essentially the principles are, things that I'm almost embarrassed, Lewis, that I have my career telling people to do stuff that's so self-evident, right? Like eat real food.
We all know, yeah.
Eat real food. Don't eat crap. Eat lots of vegetables. Eat lots of good fats. Get good quality protein. It's not that hard.
When your brain is troubled for whatever reason, head injuries from playing football, early Alzheimer's disease, you live in a mold-filled home, you have COVID-19, which we know affects brain function, or Lyme disease, it damages your brain, and then you're more vulnerable to anxiety, depression, temper problems, and people don't get that. There's all this talk about get your mind right, but think of it like hardware, physical functioning of your brain, software, your mind, network connections, your relationships. If the hardware's not right, the software won't run, and the network connections will be faulty. And so at Hyman clinics, we have 9 clinics around the country where we see thousands of patients every month, that it's like, get your brain right. And then we want to program it. Your mind's really important, and we want to help you work on your relationships. But if your brain's not right, nothing else is going to be as good as it can be.
So if someone is doing exercises or practices in their relationships, dealing with anger management, stress, anxiety, depression, if they're working on the software and not the hardware, what will happen?
This is not as effective. I mean, it can be very helpful,
right?
But just like the computer analogy. And I didn't know this. It was in 1991 when I ordered my first SPECT scan. SPECT is the study we do at Hyman clinics. I'm already a double board certified psychiatrist, had been a psychiatrist for about a decade. And I always felt like I was throwing darts in the dark at my patients. That there's a great book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. Because if what I'm doing is right, and I believe it is, it's really creating a revolution in brain health, mental health care. And the first step of the revolution, Thomas Kuhn wrote about in 1962, is you notice a flaw in the system. And I was really well trained. I trained to be a psychiatrist at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C. And if you have 6 of these 9 symptoms, you get diagnosed with depression. And then I give you a medication.
Right.
Like
That's what you did for
Prozac.
a while.
But some of the people I'd put on Prozac got better, and some of them became suicidal. Some of them became aggressive. Some of them became obsessive and anxious. And I'm like, this isn't working like it should.
Right.
And
for a small percentage, maybe it helps, but not for everyone.
well, maybe even a good percentage it helps, but a good percentage it hurts, which would horrify me because I would always feel off balance. I didn't know this would work, that would work. Plus, I didn't care about my own brain at all because I hadn't seen it. And in 1991, when I started ordering scans, I scanned my mom. She had a beautiful, healthy brain. I scanned me and it wasn't healthy, but I played football in high school. I had meningitis when I was a young soldier. And I had bad habits. I wasn't sleeping, I was eating fast food. And when I scanned myself, I developed a concept. I wanted my mother's brain. And so I called that brain envy. Freud was wrong. Penis envy is not the cause of anybody's problem. You got to learn to love and care for your brain. And so the next 30 years, I've been figuring out how can I have a better brain? Because when I have a better brain, I have a better life. And what I realized is depression's not one thing. That's why Prozac didn't work for everyone. For some people, they have really low blood flow and activity in the brain. For some people, it's really high. And for some people, they had head injuries. In fact, if you go, hey, Daniel, single most important thing you've learned from 183,000 scans, that's how many we've done, is that mild traumatic brain injury is a major cause of psychiatric illness.
Oh, man.
And nobody knows about it because psychiatrists, by and large, never look at the brain.
What does psychiatric illness mean? Is it the same thing as mental health disorder, mental health disease? What does that mean?
Right. I mean, it's the same thing. It's people who struggle with anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, schizophrenia, attention deficit disorder, addictions. But
So you're saying if we played football, we're screwed forever?
you're vulnerable.
Okay.
Since we played football and you're bigger and probably way better than me, so you got your head hit more.
Yes.
I was on the best position in the field, which is I was a backup quarterback. Best position
See,
in
we're
the
on
field.
the field, yeah.
And but you're clearly more vulnerable. So in 2007, Anthony Davis came to see me. He's the Hall of Fame running back from USC. He's called the Notre Dame Killer because in 1972 he scored 6 touchdowns against the University of Notre Dame. And he was at the time confused. He had memory deficits. He had temper problems. He's getting into fights. He had no business. And one day he's driving on the 405 and he had no idea where he was going. And he pulled over, called a friend of him at the USC School of Medicine. He says, you should go see Dr. Hyman. And when I saw him, his brain at 54 looked like it was 90 and bad for 90. And Anthony just did everything I asked him to do. And 5 months later, his brain is better. He's excited. He's like, Doc, we have to talk about this. And this is at a time the NFL is really in active denial that they have a problem. And so we did a study. He helped me with the Los Angeles chapter of the NFL Players Association. They co-sponsored my first study. High levels of damage in players. And what we found, they had 4 times the level of depression and significantly higher incidences of dementia. But 80% of them got better when I put them on a brain health program. So it's...
Wow. Now, do you think, I know from transitioning out of sports as, a professional football player, transitioning where my identity was tied to that thing for so long, that when I left and that I had this mini identity crisis for a few years of living in the past and will my life ever be the same type of mentality. Can the depression or anxiety come from the identity crisis as well? Or is it more tied to the traumas you hit? Because when I was in the game, I felt like I had a purpose, a mission. I didn't feel as stressed and overwhelmed, but it's when I left the game, when that came up? Is it a combination or is it?
It's always a combination.
Yeah.
Always. I always think of people in 4 big circles. What's the physical functioning of your brain and body? So it's a biological circle. What's the psychological circle, which is your development? That really matters. And your ability to manage your mind. In my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening, I talk about the ants and the dragons.
Yes.
The ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal your happiness. And the dragons with big psychological issues from the past, like the abandoned, invisible, and insignificant dragon. It's my dragon. That are always sort of breathing fire on your emotional brain. So biological, psychological, social. It's like, well, how's your money? How's your relationships? I mean, we're just coming out, hopefully, of a pandemic that has spawned another mental health pandemic, right? So biological, psychological, social, and spiritual, which most psychiatrists would never touch. But 80% of the population believes in God and has deep-rooted spiritual beliefs. And it's ultimately, well, why are you on the planet? And you had lost your sense of meaning and purpose, where you had one life and then, well, all of a sudden you don't have that anymore.
Right.
And I'm a huge fan of Ariana Grande's song, Thank You, Next, because those 3 words are mental health.
Huge.
It's gratitude for what's happened in the past, looking forward.
Absolutely.
Gratitude for your career, and then like, all right, what's next? And if you had known me at the end of your career, you'd like go, good, we're not gonna hit our head anymore, we're gonna take care of our brain so we can do something fun, which
Exactly.
obviously you've done.
Yeah, it's been great. We have to acknowledge the season of our life and then move on to the next season. What would you say are the 3 worst things we can do for our brain? If the brain health is the foundation for our mindset, our heart health, the way we view the world, what are the 3 worst things we can do? Whether it be taking a substance, thinking a thought, staying in a toxic relationship, being around mold all day, like what are the, trauma to the head?
Well, I mean, the worst thing you can do is not care about it, is not have brain envy. That's the worst thing
Have brain envy.
you can do. And I have a little tiny habit I love. I worked with BJ Fogg from the Persuasive Tech
Stanford.
Lab at Stanford. And we worked with him for 6 months on how people change. And we created 50 tiny habits. But my favorite tiny habit is before you go to do something today, ask yourself, takes 3 seconds, is this good for my brain or bad for it? And if you can answer that question with information and love of yourself, love of your mission, you are going to be better.
Yeah.
Because when your brain is better, you're better.
Absolutely.
So that's number 1, is you don't care.
Yep.
Number 2 is you engage in behaviors that hurt your brain. Whether it's head trauma or thinking of marijuana as going green, it's not, it damages the brain. Alcohol is not a health food. Living in a mold-filled environment. You may know Dave Asprey.
Absolutely.
Dave and I are buddies.
Yeah.
He got scanned about 15 years ago and it was like moth-eaten. It was
Really?
terrible. But he was living in a mold-filled home. And he actually did a documentary called Moldy that I'm in on the impact of an environmental toxin on your brain. And I would say the third thing, so brain envy, engage in behaviors that hurt your brain. The third thing would be you just never do anything to help your brain, such as, we talked about this before we started, table tennis, which is just a great brain game.
Yes.
Because you got to get your eyes, your hands, and feet all to work together while you think about this spin on the ball. So I think of it like aerobic chess. And people never think about their cerebellum. It's the Rodney Dangerfield part of the brain. Now, I'm horrified because many young people don't know who Rodney Dangerfield is. He was a comedian who used to say, I get no respect. And then he'd talk about why he got no respect. Well, in the back bottom part of your brain, there's cerebellum actually means little brain. It's 10% of the brain's volume, but it has half, 50% of the brain's neurons. And it's involved in coordination, which is why table tennis is great for your cerebellum, but also thought coordination, how quickly you can integrate new information. And we know people who have ADD have sleepy cerebellums. People who have autism awfully have damaged cerebellums. And so athletics are so important, right? These coordination exercises like martial arts is amazing, as long as you don't hit your head, as long as you don't hit your head, because the brain is soft, about the consistency of soft butter, tofu, custard, somewhere between egg whites and jello, and your skull is really hard and has sharp bony ridges. This is why the thousands of blows you took to your head are just bad. Helmets don't protect you from brain damage. They protect you from skull fractures. But inside your brain is doing this repeatedly. And that's not a good thing. You can't take your laptop and just drop it repeatedly and expect it to do what it needs to do.
Oh my gosh, I just keep thinking of the decades of brain hitting over and over. But I think, what I love about your message and your research is that it doesn't matter if you've been through that in the past, as long as you're aware of it and you start to practice habits and routines and really set your environment up, your relationships, these 4 circles up for success, you can really heal a lot of the past trauma in the brain. Is that right?
Absolutely.
How much?
That's the exciting thing.
How much from these scans you've done where people have had horrible looking scans, I mean, whether it be brain trauma or sexual trauma, whatever it is, that they were stuck in some type of brain trauma. And they went on a program of better lifestyle, better habits, spiritual growth, personal development. Were you able to see a significant transformation within a year, 5 years, 10 years? How long does this take?
Well, I have Anthony Davis's scans 10 years apart and dramatically better. Or one of my favorite NFL players, his name is Duval Love. He was an offensive guard for the Los Angeles Rams for 12 years. And when I saw him, he's obese, he's depressed, he's been to jail, he's a mess. And he just did what I asked him to do. And that's why I love my NFL players, because
they're coachable.
They're used to being coached.
Tell me what to do, coach. I'll do it.
Hey, coach, tell me what to do. And he lost 110 pounds. And he's actually ended up getting his master's degree. I was like, oh my God. And, he's trim, he's happy, he's fit, and his brain is radically better. Now, it depends, right, on how much you played and how many hits and how damaged it is. And it also depends on the brain you brought into football, because some people brought really healthy brains into football. They had parents who cared, they had reasonable nutrition and so on. And some people brought in terrible brains.
Yes.
But 80% of our people get better, especially if they do what we ask them.
Is this better in terms of you're 80% back to a super healthy, perfect brain? Is it wow, this thing's unbelievable, off the charts healthy, everyone can envy your brain even if you went through trauma? Or is it it looks really good?
It depends on what you start with.
Yeah.
One of my other players, Anthony Trucks, who I just love, his brain was suffering when I first saw him.
Really?
And a year
Trucks
later.
from Oregon? Oregon football player who played in the NFL for a few years? I know Trucks, yeah.
Yeah, I love him.
Good guy.
And he just did what I asked him
positive guy.
to do.
Yeah.
And a year later, his brain's healthy.
Really?
Yeah.
So it wasn't healthy when he came in. A year later, it's healthy.
Right. And that's the cool thing about the brain. Every day, your brain, and there's an area called the hippocampus. And so I don't know if this is too much nerd neuroscience, but the cerebellum's really important. The hippocampus is really important because it's involved with mood and memory.
Interesting.
And it's Greek for seahorse because it's shaped like a seahorse. And every day, the hippocampus makes 700 new baby stem cells or new baby seahorses.
Every day?
Every day.
In the brain?
In the brain. You're making new cells every day. So neuroscientists, when I was taking neuroscience in medical school, they told us, if you hurt your brain, you're screwed and you're not getting it back. Well, that was a lie. That the brain continues to make new neurons throughout life. And every day you're growing those babies if you put them in a healthy environment, or you're murdering them. And funny story. Came out last year. I've been Miley Cyrus's doctor for about a decade, and I adore her. Yeah. And she was smoking a lot of pot, as everybody knows. And but she's also an animal lover. So when I told her the pot was suffocating the baby seahorses, she's like, Dr. Hyman, that's so unfair. No, I love animals. You can't say that. Take that back.
Wow.
And now she's better to her brain. Just the information, know better, do better.
I'm going to ask you some controversial questions about brain health. How much is it a third of Americans are obese, or is it 2/3?
Oh, no.
2/3 of Americans?
72% of Americans are overweight.
Are overweight.
42% of us are obese.
Obese.
I published 3 studies. In fact, I did an NFL study. One of them was an NFL study. I took players at the same position who were at a healthy weight versus those that were overweight. The overweight had sleepy frontal lobes. They had decreased activity in the frontal lobe. I just published a study on 35,000 people. It's one of the largest imaging studies ever done. And there is virtually a linear correlation between as your weight goes up, the function of your brain goes down.
Really?
Oh, morbidly obese was worse than obese, which was worse than overweight, which was worse than healthy weight.
So healthy weight versus...
So healthy weight would be the best activity, and then overweight, and then obese, and then morbidly
What
obese.
consists as overweight versus obese? Is this body fat percentage?
Well, it's something called BMI, or body mass index, which in NFL players actually doesn't correlate very well.
Yeah.
For them, it's their waist to height ratio.
Interesting.
So your waist should be half your height or less. So if you're 6 feet tall, that's 72 inches. Your waist. And you got to measure. You can't go by your pant size because the clothing industry knows that we're unhappy. And so you guys got to put a tape measure right around your belly button. And so if you're 6 feet, your waist should be 36 inches or less. And
that's good.
If it's not, then it's good to work on. Right? And just see it as a problem to solve. But if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it, if it's headed to the dark place, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors. I have a mnemonic for that I write about in the books called Bright Minds. Well, if you're overweight, that automatically means you have 5 of the risk factors.
Really?
Because being overweight decreases blood flow. That's what my study showed. It increases inflammation. It stores toxins. Fat stores toxins. Like if you smoke pot, it actually stays in your body for 30 days.
Wow.
It changes your hormones. And this is like shocking for me in my NFL work, that these big, strapping, virile men are almost all low in testosterone, because when you have subconcussive blows, it damages the pituitary gland, which turns off the production of testosterone. And so belly fat especially takes healthy testosterone and turns it into unhealthy, cancer-promoting forms of estrogen. And so, you have the diabetes risk factor, blood flow, inflammation, toxins, and hormones. And so...
That's all from being overweight.
That's all from being overweight. It's just a thing we should be working on. And what I often say is the real weapons of mass destruction, ISIS has nothing on our food industry.
Right.
They're highly processed, pesticide sprayed, high glycemic, low fiber food-like substances stored in plastic containers. This is what's really killing the health of America.
Okay, so obesity is what I'm hearing you say, obesity is a big factor to mental health stresses and brain stresses.
And Alzheimer's disease.
And Alzheimer's.
Yeah,
obesity.
I mean, it all sort of goes together, from depression to problems in school to memory problems later in life.
What's your thought? I mean, I'm all for people loving themselves where they're at
where they're at in their life and loving their bodies for where they're at and not shaming themselves, and the self-love movement of accepting yourself for where you are. But that's only going to hurt our brains if we're not actually saying, okay, I accept and love myself where I'm at and the decisions I've made to be here, but I've got to start working on these things. Otherwise, there's going to be some challenges emotionally, mentally, anxiety, depression, if I don't work on it, right? My health.
The don't worry, be happy people die the earliest from accidents and preventable illnesses. And I want people to love themselves. But doing the right thing is an act of love.
Now you are helping people essentially reverse autoimmune disease and become healthier, happier, whole human beings through nutrition. And you realized a long time ago that fixing the heart medically can only take you so far.
Yeah, that's right.
We have to fix something else. And what is that?
Well, you got to fix, why, for instance, you got heart disease in the first place. And I was taught, as all my colleagues were taught, that heart disease is kind of inevitable, that, that's the leading cause of death for both men and women.
It's inevitable for all of us?
Yeah, pretty much. That's what we were
At
taught.
some point.
Yeah, and then even if you get it, let's say you get coronary artery disease, that the best we can do is slow it down, to slow the progression. And what I realized, thanks to Big Ed, who I talk about in all my books, who reversed his coronary artery disease.
This is a man who had 100 pounds overweight.
He was really overweight. He was late 40s. He had inoperable coronary artery disease. Everything was clogged up. Wow. And this guy went.
And so you opened him up.
He had gone to 6 different centers in the United States saying, do something. And everybody who saw him said, no, there's no place to do bypasses. There's no place to do stents because everything's clogged up. Have a nice day. And so this guy spent about 6 months doing this. And he went on a diet during this time. And he went to a health food store and he bought a bunch of supplements, kind of willy-nilly, quite frankly. And so when I met him, he was still a huge guy. He weighed 265 pounds. And he brings me his angiogram, the movie of his heart, from Miami, Florida. And I look at it and I go, I agree with everybody else. There's nothing I'm going to do for you. And he says, well, yeah, that's what everybody says, but here's the deal. I've gone on this diet. I've lost 45 pounds in the last 6 months, and I've taken all these supplements. And, maybe I did something in here, and I'm scratching my professor.
So the video was from 6 months prior?
Prior.
Wow, okay.
And I said, well, good for you for losing weight, and, I know what you did with those supplements. You made expensive urine, which I fully believed. And he said, well, why don't we do another angiogram? What would it hurt? So I go, don't get your hopes up, but okay. So this guy has cleaned out, in 6 months' time, half the blockages in his coronary arteries. Gone, shrunk. And you go, I've never seen this before. That doesn't happen. And so
this was what, after 30 years of doing this? After 35 years?
Yeah. And that doesn't happen. Come on, that's impossible. You don't clean things out.
The only way to clean it out is through surgery.
Right. Yeah, or put a stent in.
Wow.
So let me give you an example, and this is kind of off the subject. So if you work out with weights and you happen to wear a wedding ring or an Oura ring, you get calluses, right?
Yes.
So calluses are your body's response to protecting itself against an irritation. And you build up layers and layers, and right? So it turns out that these plaques inside arteries is a response to an irritation. And you build up calluses.
Yeah.
And think about it, if I took off this ring and started working out with weights, this callus would go away because there's no longer any irritation. And what Big Ed showed me was he had removed the irritation, so he no longer needed calluses, and
his heart started to heal.
and it literally goes away. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, is teaching people how to remove the irritation to the inside of their blood vessels, and the calluses miraculously go away. They don't miraculously go away. You don't need them anymore.
Right.
And
Was there a moment when you were doing deep in your practice where you were like, I'm not going to work on another heart until they actually follow this plan and start losing weight and start eating the right things? And then if there's no hope, then maybe I'll dive in. But was there a point where you're like, never again will I do?
Well, yeah, so I mean, I wrote about this in the Plant Paradox, that I had this gentleman in his 60s, bad diabetic, came in with a heart attack, scheduled him for surgery the next morning. We're in the pre-op room, and the guy is trembling like a leaf, and he says, I can't go through this. And I've learned enough that if somebody is that terrified, don't go put them to sleep and do it, because something probably is not going to work out very well. Fear. So I said, okay, I'll make you a deal. I said, you got to follow everything I tell you to do, and if you do it, I can guarantee you I will not have to operate on you. But if you don't do it, you're coming back here and we're going to do this. Well, that was now 10 years ago. He's not a diabetic. He has no coronary artery disease. Wow. He comes in twice a year now, and just, and we do stress tests on him, and he became one of my best patients.
Wow.
And,
So you were going to do
we were wheeling him into surgery, and the guy's shaking like a leaf, going, I don't think I can do this. I said, okay, here's the deal.
Wow. That's crazy.
Oh, yeah, we always reminisce. He says, it's been 10 years now, and I followed what you told me. And I said, yeah, here you are, you don't have a scar on your chest. I said, you're really bad for business.
So what were the few things you told him that he went out and did? Was there like some specific exact things he did?
Yeah, well, I do this in all my books. So actually, Jack, my staff always tell me, don't say this story because people get the wrong idea. Jack LaLanne, I got to know Jack LaLanne late in his life.
Yeah.
He was actually an advisor to our Arthritis Institute in Palm Springs, and so Jack was the godfather of fitness. I mean, come on, let's give him his due.
The juicer.
Yeah, the juicer. That was his big mistake. But anyhow, so Jack LaLanne used to have this expression: is that if it tastes good, spit it out. And I obviously like to sell books, and my staff said, don't say that, because then they think they're going to eat twigs and weeds, and it's going to taste awful, and you got to eat bad tasting food. Well, that's not what he meant. He actually meant that you should not be eating for this 2-inch by 3-inch piece of muscle, your tongue, but you should be eating for the microbiome, for the bacteria and all the other cute little viruses that actually live in your gut, live in your mouth, live on your skin. And if you eat for them, they will take care of you, because you are actually their home. We're merely a condominium for bugs. And
how many bugs do we have on our body or in us?
So, yeah, we have well over 100 trillion bacteria. And since the Human Microbiome Project was, finished about 5 years ago now, I mean, we didn't know that these guys really existed. In fact, I was on my podcast, the Dr. Gundry podcast, we had Dr. David Kessler, who was head of the FDA in the Reagan years, who made the guidelines for the labels, the labeling laws on the back of packages that show saturated fats and carbohydrates. And the labels, by the way, if we get into this, are completely wrong. They were forced on the Reagan administration by big food companies.
Wow.
And so, anyhow, if you feed bacteria what they want to eat, and that's all in the longevity paradox, they will take care of you. They will not, they'll take care of the wall, the lining of your gut, and you will not actually age, which is kind of cool.
So if you take care
Of them.
of the bugs in your body, you will not age.
Right. So you got 100 trillion bacteria. You have over 10,000 different species of bacteria. And just last year, they discovered another 1,000, so who knows?
Right.
So 99% of the genetic material that exists in you and me is non-human genetic material. Our genes are actually so unimportant, it's kind of humorous. And when people take a family history, what they're actually finding out is if your parents taught you how to eat, and most people's parents teach the kids how to eat, and your parents had diabetes, or your parents had high blood pressure, or your parents had coronary artery disease, and you eat like your parents did, the odds are that you will do that.
Right.
For two reasons: the food choices that you made, but more importantly, you inherited your bacteria from your parents and actually your siblings. And
So it's not the genes of your parents that mean you are susceptible to heart disease or Alzheimer's or whatever, right? It's not the genes of your parents. It's typically the foods they ate that you're probably eating the exact same foods that cause the same type of problems.
correct. Yeah. Right. I mean, there is an Alzheimer's gene, and my program, according to Dale Bredesen, is the best way not to activate that gene. And there are certain genes that people inherit that make the world's meanest, nastiest, stickiest cholesterol that most doctors don't even measure. And oh, by the way, if you're prescribed a statin drug, a lipid-lowering drug, it actually worsens this other particle.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, there are genes, but they're such a small part. Nature magazine had a big article in late 2018, I think proving that only about 7 or 8% of what will happen to us is based on our genes, and 97 or 98% of what's going to happen to us is based on our environment and our food choices.
Our decisions.
Our decisions, yeah.
Now you said we can, aging is essentially a choice is what I'm hearing you say, but if someone watching this saying, well, Dr. Gundry, you've got white hair, you look older than when you were 10 years old. So
yes.
How can you say that you can eat certain things that can reverse aging or can make you not age when you look older than when you were younger?
That's true. I'm definitely chronologically older. But recently on my podcast, I had Dr. Terry Walls, who I think is very famous, rightfully so, for reversing her MS, her multiple sclerosis. And she did it via diet. She did it initially by eating 9 cups of vegetables a day. And I dare people to try to eat 9 cups of vegetables.
A lot of fiber, right?
It's a lot of fiber. Now, and we'll get back to fiber, because I think that's probably the key. And this is actually what Jacqueline was trying to say. If it tastes good, spit it out. And Terry became famous for telling people that when you look in the toilet every morning, you should see a very large coiled snake looking back up at you. And in fact, in the plant paradox, in the original manuscript, I had said, when you look in the toilet, you should see a giant anaconda looking back up at you. And my editor, Julie Wills, called me up. She said, do you know there's a movie where an anaconda is coming out of the toilet? And I said, oh yeah. She said, I don't think we want that visual in your book. And she said, well, let's take that out. So, but what we didn't know, what you didn't know, I didn't know, is that giant coiled snake is not the fiber and the roughage that we ate. It's actually bacteria that have eaten the fiber.
No way.
And
so bacteria inside of us?
Oh, yeah.
That's coming out.
That's coming out. So most of your
Oh my
poop
gosh.
is, if you will, baby bacteria.
No way.
And so the more,
So we want to get the bacteria out of us?
no, you want them to grow and prosper. And the more they grow and
It sounds like
prosper,
aliens in our body. It's like
you know,
feeding us.
you're absolutely right. And one of the things that is kind of hard to embrace is we probably only exist as a place for bacteria to live on Earth.
Wow.
And you know, intelligence,
If there was no bacteria inside of us,
we're done.
we would die.
So we know that we can breed germ-free mice. An interesting fun fact that I put in the longevity paradox, my 5th grade science project was to build a germ-free mouse environment. This was in 1960. And so this isn't my first rodeo. So we can raise germ-free mice that have no bacteria in them, have no bugs in them. And they live short lives.
Really?
They have horrible immune systems.
They get sick. They
They get sick, yeah. And so they're the basis of so much of what we know. And so so bacteria are incredibly important. And we know now that these bacteria actually teach our immune system from day one. In fact, scary, we used to think that the placenta, where the baby of the womb, the uterus that feeds the baby, is sterile. Of course it has to be, because the baby has to be sterile. The placenta is full of bacteria.
feeding
The baby. And
keep
it
it safe.
turns out that the bacteria in the placenta actually give information to the baby's immune system before the baby even pops out of the womb. And
So we need these viruses, these good viruses.
We need these viruses and bacteria. We need them. And in fact, fun fact, long ago, the only way to treat bacterial infections were viruses that could actually infect bacteria and kill viruses. And Eli Lilly Company from Indianapolis got its start, this giant pharmaceutical company, as what's called a bacteriophage company. Bacteriophages are viruses that infect bacteria. And it turns out that viruses actually are really useful in us as well. We have trillions and trillions and trillions of viruses in us right now.
What's the difference between a good virus and a bad virus?
If the good virus is doing what it's supposed to do. Okay, let's do a deep dive into microbiology.
Okay. And what is the definition of virus?
Okay, so a virus is probably the smallest reproducible form of life, however we want to define life. So most living things are capable of reproducing themselves one way or another, dividing or multiplying one way or another.
Just like humans.
Exactly. So a virus, unfortunately, cannot replicate itself. It has to borrow another cell and take over the cell's machinery to manufacture more copies of viruses. And that's how they get reproduced. But in the end, every living creature is here just to make a new copy. And you and I only exist was to make a new copy.
Wow.
And I hopefully actually only exist so my bacteria can make new copies of themselves. I'm a condominium for my inhabitants.
Duplication, yeah.
And if they're happy and I'm a good landlord to them, they will keep the place nice, and they actually would like me to stick around a very long time because I'm their home.
Before we continue this video, make sure to subscribe below and turn on the notification bell right now so you don't miss out on these great videos every single day. Is it possible to
live to 200?
Yeah.
Okay, let me be upfront. It's completely irresponsible promise today.
Yes.
And I'm actually communicating and using this 200 years by a number of reasons. One, if we want to change a lot of lives, you need to get an attention. So when you come into conversation saying, well, how about living 100 years? People are like, okay, you know, I've seen people who
Lots of people have done that, yeah.
So actually, I've created this whole 3 horizons, like Horizon 1 today, Horizon 2 like in 5 to 10 to 20 years for us to live to 150. And it was not enough. People were like, okay, the oldest woman on earth lived to 122, so 150 is almost there.
Yeah.
So I created the 3rd horizon, like human avatars, human brain AI integration, virtual world, and saying, well, this is where we're gonna go if we wanna live 200 years. But so again, I'm really mindful that this is a irresponsible promise, but it's such a great aspiration.
Sure.
And as we discussed, like every morning, I'm 49, so every morning when I wake up, I have like 3/4 of my life ahead of me. So this is like the biggest source of energy for me. There's so many things I can do.
So just thinking that I'm going to live to 200, it makes you start to change the way you think, your actions, your habits, your routines, your plans. You're not planning like, I'm going to start getting sick in 20 years and then retire and then just sit around. You're like, I've got 150 years left.
Yeah. Well, that's.
It changes your identity.
Well, this is the term that we use, your psychological age identity, and obviously by our lifespan and life cycle terms. So if I'm 49 out of my 200, I'm still a kid in a way, right? So the world is full of opportunities for me. So that's the aspect of that, and then your energy change. The way you look, the way you communicate, the way you dream, the way you share something with people. So that's a very important aspect of that. The other aspect is we almost, and this is one of our limiting beliefs, we always neglect the connection between our mind and body. We kind of think it's separate. It's not. So if you start thinking, I'm young, and you have your psychological target age like 10 or 15 years below your calendar age, your body actually start to react and develop itself in a different way. You become more younger, just
the chemistry of your
So if you look at
cells.
Biomarkers, right? The studies where we managed to reverse aging, literally at a very small increment still, but it's just a lot of progress. Always had this psychological component, like psychological work stream, when people just think that they're younger than they really is.
When they think they're younger, they physically become younger.
Yeah.
And we've been able to track that or research that?
Yeah, so basically what is happening with, we just done a piece of research last year. It's still pretty small group. But then the psychological aspect of aging, like thinking young, like almost think and grow young.
Yes.
Just one of the subchapters in the book is always the part of rejuvenation routine. And a lot of studies where we actually trying to reverse aging based on biomarkers that you have, like 44.
And what's the best way to think young? What does that look like?
Okay.
So what's a practice of thinking young?
Yeah. Okay. So I can tell only from my own experience.
Yes.
Well, that's why we're having this conversation, right?
How do you think young?
Yeah. So first of all, you just need to almost like ignore your calendar age and allow yourself to be younger in terms of your dreams, aspiration, behavior. Just ignore like a social standards for you and social conditions and pressure for your calendar age. And the best thing is just think about the figure. So my figure is 25 years old. Man.
The figure.
Yeah, like a particular age that you think your psychological
This is who
target age.
I'm this old.
Yeah, I'm like 25 years old. Obviously, I'm having my conversation. Well, Sergey, come on, you might look like 35 years old. You're not that young. But then in the end, if it's part of you for like many days, weeks, and month, it's just becoming your almost identity. So having your target psychological age ridiculously below your calendar age is a great way to start.
It's a great strategy.
Yeah. So that's
just saying I'm 20. You're 49. So that you'd be saying like, I'm 25 years old. I feel 25. I feel and look 25. Just saying this to yourself, repeating a mantra, writing it down. What is
priming?
This?
So what I do like in the morning when I do priming, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna live 200 years. Actually, it's better to have healthy and happy years because universe will give you like the figure, but the quality is probably more important than quantity. So I'm gonna live healthy and happy years, 200 years in the body of 25 years old man. Wow. And that's it. This is what I'm doing. And then in the evening when I have my gratefulness moment, I'm just repeating that. And that's it. And usually it takes like a week or two for you to accept that or start accepting that. And just make it and see the changes. You'll be amazed. You're going to behave like a kid. Your level of energy is going to be completely different. And level of aspirations and your mission and your kind of life plan is different as well.
So I know you have like two different visions. Where one is like, okay, for the next 5 to 10 years, what are the things that are available to us now to help us age in reverse? And then 10 years and beyond, all the other things that are coming that aren't here yet that we can look forward to. So what are something that someone who doesn't have a lot of resources and funds right now, they can do to start aging in reverse besides psychological age?
Today?
Yes.
Okay, there's so many things that we can do. They might sound boring, but they work just in a brilliant way.
Right.
Okay. So just for the interest of time. So in the book, I have like a bonus chapter. It's 2 times bigger than any other chapter in the book, and it's about 10 longevity choices. With your permission, I just want to go through 5.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
These are 5 buckets.
Yeah, 5 longevity buckets. So, and let's start with the one which is your importance of your annual health checkup.
Annual health checkup.
Yeah. When I have 30 seconds on longevity, even on the passport control, when people ask me like, what brought you to the United States? I'm like, I'm on longevity mission. I want to change 1 billion lives. And they're like, what? So what do I need to do? So when I have 30 seconds, I'm saying the most important day every year in your life is the day of your annual checkup. So yesterday, for me, I went to Human Longevity Center in San Diego. It was the most important day for me this year. When you have your annual medical checkup, it should be as comprehensive as possible, and it should be as expensive as possible to the extent that you can afford. Okay, but then
what are the things you're doing at that checkup? What do you do? Is it drawing blood?
So like
checking your sight, your hearing, your heartbeat.
There's so many things that you do there. Like I gave 21 blood samples just to go through all of my biomarkers. Yeah, wow. But remember, I'm kind of crazy guy. This is my mission, passion.
You could do like
profession.
3 probably. It'd be fine.
Yeah. But I just want to mention that you don't need to go to extreme. What healthcare system has to offer to you, on whatever level you are in society and in terms of your wealth, is enough to detect the biggest risk factors and problems in your body, right? So don't think, well, of course Sergey can do it. He's a longevity investor, he has an access, he has a knowledge. Yes, I do, but a lot of people around me, it's just hospital next door, and having a dialogue with your doctor or with healthcare provider saying, annual checkup, and your risks are heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and not really neurodegenerative disease, because we really don't know now where it comes from and how to treat that. So that's the thing. So what I do is like full body MRI, 21 samples of blood, CT, ultrasound check of your arteries here, your heart. I actually put the heart monitor. I'm a big fan of wearables, And
it's crazy. So what is that? That sticks in your chest?
So actually, this is a lot of fun.
How's it fun?
Yeah. So for you have audio audience as
and
well.
video, yeah.
So that's like a small piece of wearable right on your chest next to the heart. So you can
Kind of
wear.
looks like a glucose monitor a little
It
bit,
is,
right?
yeah. I actually have glucose monitor
Nice.
here. So it's Internet of Body. We'll come back to that. So you put it on your chest. You wear it for probably 7 days. And what it does is monitor performance of your heart on every minute within this 7 days. So then you ship it. It's right here on the chip, and it's much more kind of scientific, precise, and data-driven. That everything
How are you
we've had
sleeping?
before.
What's happening during the day, in the morning, at night?
Exactly.
It's tracking all of it.
Yeah, and it's tracking, and the major focus is performance of your heart, right? Because heart disease and cancer are two biggest reasons for that. It's like more than 50% of deaths after age of 50 happening because of these two reasons. Okay.
Heart disease or cancer.
And cancer, right? And then
how can you prevent those things?
Okay, so coming back to your annual checkup,
health
right?
checkup,
Longevity bucket 1. Think about cancer 20 years ago. People thought it's kiss of death. People were actually deferring their cancer check, because if you knew you had cancer, you're going to be dead in just a few months. Well, it's not the case anymore. We're right in the middle of winning the war against cancer. It's still very expensive. It's still extremely dangerous disease. But if you detect cancer, and we invest through Longevity Vision Fund, we invest a lot in early cancer diagnostic. Early on, like stage 1 cancer, your chances to recover is 93 to 100%, depending on the cancer type. Imagine.
If you detect it early.
Early.
So that's why having the health checkup once a year will allow you to catch it early, hopefully. Exactly.
And technology is really progressing in this field, right? I'm not sure to what extent you're comfortable speaking about colonoscopy, but that's the main kind of tool and intervention for us to check like a colon cancer.
Colonoscopy.
Yeah. So then I call.
How many of those have you done?
So I was just delaying I was like so afraid of us. I don't want to do it. So you do it under sedation. So I've done 2 in the last 5 years. So I call Human Longevity up and say, guys, do I need to do one this year? And they said, no. We have a Colon Guard, like a new product, and it's like $19, 19.
Colon Guard.
Yeah. Colon
Guard. Like a supplement or something?
Yeah, no, it's a test. It's actually a fecal test. I'm not sure I need to go into these details for the audience, but
this is discussion.
Stool, yeah.
And then you send it in.
Yeah, and then but just using the neural network built by artificial intelligence on the basis of 100,000 samples for the price of $19, you have almost like the same detection rate like this invasive, awful, and scary procedure. And if you buy 20 tests, you don't need to buy it, right? It's just part of your plan, right? But like for 20 tests, you pay $100. Imagine, so every technology that we invest in the Longevity Vision Fund, don't change the current state, and it's not improving this by like factor of 10 or 20%. It's decreasing the cost of healthcare for people by a factor of 10, 20, 50 times. And we invested in affordable ultrasound diagnostic. We invested in different wearables, early cancer diagnostic as well. Like $19.
Wow.
That's amazing. And like and it's more than 90%, and you'll discover the very early signs of the colon cancer in combination with full body MRI. Wow. And I can speak forever about the importance of early detection, and the same with heart disease. Just in the last 10 years, you have special surgical robots, like whatever the problem you have in your heart system, it's going to be fixed with enormous degree of reliability by a human doctor who's just operating this through computer, and there's beautiful robots who's just doing so. Again, I can talk about this forever. So bucket number 1,
the annual
one of the most
checkup.
important health checkup.
And where can someone go wherever they are in the world? Do they just go to their local doctor? Do they go and say, I need an annual health checkup?
Yeah. So my focus is health disease, cancer, diabetes. That's
so ask them to test you on those things.
Yeah.
And go from there.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So that's number one, the annual health checkup. That makes sense because knowledge is power.
Exactly.
And if you're not, I think most people are like, how do I delay this checkup the longest until they need to do it because they
Yeah.
feel like something's off, then they check up.
Yeah.
But preventative care is probably the best thing you can do.
By a number
It's-
of reasons.
It's
Yeah.
like, just do the things to prevent it so you don't have to get sick.
Exactly. Well, it's 10 to 20 times cheaper.
Yes.
Right? It's much more successful.
Less painful.
Yeah, it's less painful. And you don't need to wait until your body will manifest itself with disease. Because at this stage, it's almost like stage 4, right? And your recovery chances, like if looking at cancer, is what, 20 to 30%. And in terms of the quality, and even if you survive, like my father had lung cancer back in 2005. He survived, but he shrunk in size by 1/3.
His body.
Yeah, and his quality of life never recovered to this extent. So this is where my passion for longevity
You want
started.
to
It
live
was-
longer and more quality.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's number one.
Two, I call it don't die stupid or don't do stupid things. Or scientifically, I call it passive longevity, right? So if you're smoking, statistically, you're going to live 10 years, less, right? And if you look at the average for your gender and population group, okay? So smoking, minus 10 years from your life. Not using seat belts, minus
what?
2 years. Seat belts in the car.
Seat belts.
Seat belts,
Yep.
minus 2 years from your life. Excessive consumption of drugs and alcohol, I don't even have the figures, but that's dangerous as well. So these are the simple things. Or don't doing super extreme sports. Like for example, I've been blessed and I had an opportunity to travel to like South Pole and North Pole because it's still pretty safe trips, but then I thought, okay, what if I want to go to Everest, like the highest mountain on Earth? So probability of death, if you try to do it, is a little bit above 6%.
Wow.
So I thought, like, as a man who wants to change 1 billion lives and father of 4 kids, I don't want to do it. So these are the simple choices, and again, they all rational in regards to smoking or your safety procedures, etc. So that's very important too, and people really underestimate that.
Don't die stupid. Don't do things so extreme that it gives you more chance of dying younger.
Yeah.
Okay, number
So
three.
that's it. Third is diet. So one of our limiting beliefs, and this is what has changed for us, is we underestimate the power of food, and the food. And the fact that food can be our medicine, right? So in this regard, there's so many disagreement in scientific circles around what actually extends our life today. But there's almost one agreement. Even the most skeptical ones say that if you decrease the number of calories, your caloric intake, it's almost guaranteed that you're gonna live like 2, 3, 4 years longer. And the quality actually going to be better.
Crazy.
Yeah, it is.
You'll look younger too.
Yeah, exactly. But then the question is how you do it, right? Because you don't want to, for me, it's a nightmare just to 3 days a week, 3 times a day, 7 days a week, just to control like the number of calories that you do. So what I do, I'm doing a lot of plant-based food because the caloric intensity of vegetables is so small. Even if we have like the whole table full of vegetables, you're still going to be fine. So that's one. Two, because of the current production practices for meat and fish, the industrial version of this is full of growth hormones, antibiotics, E. coli bacteria itself. So I'm just trying to avoid this. So that's important as well. And this is why you switch to vegetables as well. I also do fasting, but it's not for everyone. I do like 36 hours of fasting every week, Monday evening to Wednesday morning.
I've been starting to do that from Sunday evening to Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
And I feel great.
It's amazing.
I just did this a couple days ago.
Yeah.
I've done it a few times this year. And I'm kind of like, okay, once a month right now, try for 24 to 36 hours.
Yeah.
And it's like maybe every 2 weeks or maybe every week eventually. And I feel like I'm getting leaner. I feel like healthier, younger, all those things. So
well, that's I also like your choice of weekdays because I'm kind of I'm killing the blue monster in the beginning, right? So I'm like, the most difficult part is like do it on Monday and Tuesday, and then for the rest of the week,
enjoy.
You enjoy yourself. Yeah. I also like wine, but specifically Californian one. But it's really unhealthy, specifically from the age of like 45, when your aging processes are starting to progress. So I'm sticking like probably 1 or 2 glasses of wine every week. Like on my scene days, like Friday evening or Saturday evening.
Max.
And that's it, yeah.
I just did a brain scan with Dr. Daniel Hyman.
Yeah,
Do you know
of
him?
course. Yeah,
Hyman
I
Clinics.
interviewed him for the book. Amazing guy.
I just got my results back literally last week and did 3 brain scans. Supposed to go back in 4 months. He wants me to he's giving me some supplements and some hyperbolic chamber.
Yeah.
Did my first one yesterday. I'm doing another one tomorrow. I'm supposed to do 40 sessions.
With oxygen?
Yeah, it's at Next Health here.
Yeah.
And in the chamber. And he said, I asked him, I go, we just had an interview come out with him, but I asked him, of smoking marijuana, cigarettes, or alcohol, which one is worse for the brain?
Yeah.
And he said marijuana, based on 80,000, I think, scan results.
Yeah.
Those that had marijuana had
Yeah.
far worse brains than those who didn't. He said, obviously, smoking and alcohol also affected, but marijuana is the worst. And so, if we know these things, that smoking, alcohol, marijuana is bad for the brain, bad for longevity, why do we keep doing them? Why do we keep doing it?
Look, it's a $1 trillion question. I can guess that I do think through evolution we didn't really have access to all these things. So our body and our mind has never been prepared to tackle the challenge of this kind of over availability of this
world.
These things. Yeah.
Of the world, right?
Yeah.
The so much stimulation, so much opportunities, challenges, adversity, pain, suffering, media. Like, it was a much simpler life 100 years ago.
Exactly.
There was still adversity, but it was like, okay, we're just hanging out with a few friends in the farm.
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
like,
that's it. Yeah, I agree. And we've never been, well, that's why I talk about discipline and the unit and longevity, because otherwise, your body through centuries, through million years of evolution, has not really been prepared to handle all this stress and all these choices.
Wow.
That's probably the shortest way to answer that.
Okay, so
that's
diet
on the
is
diet,
huge.
and also the final. That
was 3, right?
Yeah.
Number 4?
Yeah. Final piece on the diet is the importance of like take out the sugar drinks. So like we're drinking water today, so that's super important. We have way too much sugar that we should and we can process in terms of how our body works. The 4th is physical activity, and we have a funny view on physical activity. So, I mean, as humans, everything is like black and white. Everything is binary, extremes. So it's as a group of people just sitting and like watching football on TV. The other group of people are, okay, I need to run a marathon.
Yeah.
But there's so many things in between. Like the easiest thing you can do is just like wear your Whoop or a Fitbit or Apple Watch and count the steps. 10,000 steps a day is enough actually to transform your metabolic state, right? To support your longevity, like a healthy state of your body. If you look at science, starting from 6.5 thousand steps or 7,000 steps is actually enough. Then it's a plateau. But you usually say like 10,000 steps a day because we tend to under-deliver in terms of our target. And it's very easy. It's gamified. You can have immediate feedback, like a badges, congratulations, prizes, and that's the whole thing.
It's not what I tell you to eat that's important. It's what I tell you not to eat. So the first thing is don't eat grains, period.
No grains.
No grains. And that includes rice, that includes corn. I just gave a paper at the American Heart Association 3 weeks ago at the Lifestyle and Epidemiology annual meeting where we looked at